Hey guys, welcome back to Total Tactics Football. It's Fran here, and we've reached the end of our journey here in terms of Euro Cup 2020 fantasy. Of course, it was a fun ride, and honestly, thank you guys so much from the bottom of my heart for all the kind of support that you've given. The channel has grown so much with your help, and the kind of community response has been really appreciated. And I can only say that we're going to continue pushing this forward, this content going forward in terms of FPL. And if you don't play FPL, then maybe we'll see you guys at the World Cup. But regardless, let's actually go on to the final match day. I mean, it's quite a simple one in the sense that obviously we have two teams left. We really know who the key players are for both teams, but some budgeting choices will have to be factored in. And then a key choice as well will be actually what formation you decide to pursue. And a lot of it comes down to really what you could consider as a priority and what you think could happen in the game. So if I show you the kind of spreadsheet, I mean, it's obvious in terms of who we think are the best forwards, midfielders, and defenders, but it's worth considering here what actually happens in terms of how you integrate your team. So if we look at the spreadsheet very quickly, I think one of the key things that factors the way formations are done in this game day is you have to keep in mind that we have basically three formations that we can really go for. You can either go for a 4-4-2, or a 4-5-1, or a 5-4-1. And a lot of you might be questioning, why would we ever go for anything other than the two strikers? I mean, why wouldn't you go Kane and Immobile? And simply put, I think if you've been watching Italy this tournament, I mean, Immobile has had very, very ineffectual games. He's been kind of starved out of games. He's, been on the end of some balls, and at times it seems like he's been able to give an assist, but usually versus a worse team such as Turkey. It's really been the wingers and also Nico Barella as well who've been actually creating the chances for Italy and actually, instigating Italy and kind of leading them towards victory. And in my opinion, I think that's the reason why you might actually consider even if you have a Mobile, if you have enough transfers available, actually opting to go for a formation without him. Because in my opinion, I think defenders should be highly considered in this game day. What we have to consider is two things. I think historically, we've actually seen that in a lot of finals, I think, that it ends up with one team with a clean sheet in a low-scoring game. Now, of course, we shouldn't use this as a precedent to say this is exactly what's going to happen, but I think the footprints are here in terms of how these two teams operate, right? So Italy is a team where if they score a goal, they look to set deeper if they feel like they're not being able to kind of get over the ball, and that's something that they incorporated versus Spain. And some would argue, of course, that kind of led to their kind of going into extra time. But ultimately, I think Italy in the kind of knockout stages have shown that they're more than happy to kind of defend on a lead. And I feel like England is very much the same. So when you look at, for example, the Denmark game, as soon as England have a lead, they had a lot of chances to kind of exploit the spaces in behind, but they were ready and happy to protect the lead for more than roughly 10-15 minutes, and with a lot of calmness as well. And the formation is built for that too. So I would actually highly consider going for a very defender-heavy formation, and even for midfielders, because midfielders benefit from having clean sheets as well. And if you look at, for example, the reason for going Immobile would be, I mean, if you believe Italy will score, right? But simply put, I think most of Italy's goals have come from their midfielders, so it makes sense to prioritize those midfielders there, which means that you will likely end up with a 4-5-1 formation. But if we go through the picks, I think we've discussed the forwards a little bit, but let's go for the midfielders, right? I think, simply put, one of the issues with dealing with England is the fact that we know England is prone to kind of changing the formation. But what I will say is that I think Mason Mount is nailed on to play. The only game he didn't play was when he sat out a week in quarantine. He was up for selection versus Germany, but as a manager, you would never put a player on if he only had kind of 1 day or 2 days of practice, especially if he was a week out and you've had kind of the chance to maybe go for different tactics during the week where you had a full week of training with some players. And I think that's the only reason why Mason Mount was ever out of the squad. I will say that, of course, Saka, since his kind of ability to start after Foden's maybe underwhelming performances under the eyes of Gareth Southgate, has meant that Saka has been kind of given the license to start in these big games. And he didn't start in the game versus Ukraine, but that's also because he had a knock in training, which was reported. So you could actually think that in terms of priority, it could be Mount and then Saka outside of Sterling. So I think you will likely already have Sterling in your team. And so when you're looking to incorporate perhaps another English midfielder, I think it has to really come from Mount and Saka. Now, Grealish is also a good differential because one of the things about Grealish is even though he has probably the least amount of minutes out of any of the midfielders not named Sancho, simply put, his kind of creative ability, can't be undermined. And he could be someone who, like we saw in a previous game, could provide an assist even with very limited minutes. But I think it makes sense here to actually stack most of your midfield with Italian midfielders. As we said already, when we're talking about the reason for maybe not picking Immobile or maybe dropping him to your bench is because simply under this kind of mold where we have Insigne and Chiesa, we've seen that all the attacks have largely come through them. And now the attacks are even more focused on them simply because Spinazzola is now out of the team. And it means that there's a lot more kind of onus on these players to step up. And the same with someone like Barella as well. Verratti and Pessina are kind of my differentials here. Reason being because someone like Verratti is someone who's like a deep line playmaker, and the same reason why I kind of argued for Pedri last week. Verratti, simply put, is someone who's creating a lot of chances from deep, but can still provide that kind of killer ball for Italy. So whilst I don't expect him to really get onto the end of a goal, I do expect him potentially to get an assist in any game. And Pessina is almost the opposite. He's someone you might want to punt for in terms of if you expect him to be kind of a late game goal scoring option. But I would say be wary of someone like Pessina, be wary of someone like Locatelli. It's simply put that it seems like the manager actually focuses on wanting to have players like Barella and Verratti playing as many minutes as possible, and the midfielders are almost brought on to kind of reinforce a lead at times. And I feel like he's quite reticent towards dropping midfielders. You could also consider Jorginho as well in terms of Italian midfielders because he could be up for penalty taking. So we could, for example, change this person to Jorginho as well. But going for the defenders, actually, defenders. I mean, Raheem Sterling is not a defender. I apologize about that. That this should be Luke Shaw here, as we all know. Luke Shaw here, for me, of course, is sort of the priority. We did see a much more diminished role from him, in my opinion, in the Denmark game. But I think part of that as well is simply due to the fact that I think Denmark do try to play through the right when Mela is kind of stifled out of the game, because Mela is the one who centrally drives the ball through the left. And we saw that Walker did extremely well versus Mela, which meant that Denmark were trying to focus all their attacks through Højbjerg and Braithwaite on the right-hand side before trying to shift the play towards the left where Damsgaard was playing. So in my opinion, there's not the same kind of possibility there. I think Italy do struggle to actually play out of the right, which means that Shaw actually has more opportunities to push a little bit more further forward. However, I will say Di Lorenzo, his kind of counterpart in that sense, will be defending a little bit more deeply, so you could argue that Shaw will be dealt with a larger, I think, defensive threat. But simply put, I think we can expect Shaw to actually push a little bit further forward because Italy still try to play through the left, even with Spinazzola out, especially when they have Emerson in place. Maguire I've selected because I think he is probably the better set-piece threat between him and Stones. At least it seems like the set-piece plays are geared towards allowing Maguire or Kane to score. And then Stones is almost like a third person in terms of priority, right? Where he's also very good at set pieces, so I would consider him a safe pick. Kyle Walker here, the reason why he's a differential is simply put because I think in this structure he plays almost as a third centre back at times. We did see a little bit more of an effective role for him in the Denmark game, but I think part of that too was his kind of explicit task to shut down Mela on the left hand side of Denmark, and I think we can expect more of the same with Walker here when he's kind of matched up with someone like Emerson. And I think Emerson will really struggle in this game, which is also why I think Walker makes sense. But when you see his offensive returns as a fullback, I think you would be rather dismayed. Simply put, I think he's not given the license to go forwards like he sometimes is with Man City. We don't even see the kind of wild long shots that he would sometimes pull off in the team. He isn't really crossing so much. What he usually likes to do is pass, for example, inside to someone like Mount, who's kind of free roaming, or back to Calvin Phillips. And for that reason, I don't really like Walker too much here in comparison to the three other defenders. Now, if we move on to the Italian defenders, I mean, even if you think England will probably win this game, it doesn't really make sense to go entirely with English players in terms of, disregarding Italy's defense if you think England will score. The reason why is because I think this game should be a low-scoring game no matter what, and we have still seen some solid offensive threats from Italy. Bonucci has been kind of quintessential in terms of set pieces. I think he's come close a few times. So is Chiellini. But Chiellini is slightly higher priced, which means that Bonucci is the more interesting pick. We've also seen Bonucci go for some more long balls within the team, so he is kind of given that license to kind of play long ball and instigate attacks, which they tried to do a few times versus Spain, actually. And some of those kind of key passes did get off and did threaten the Spanish defense at times. The reason why I consider Di Lorenzo to be a safe pick is for two reasons. I mean, first of all, he's the cheapest defender who's glued on and nailed on out of both teams. And simply put, he's someone that I think Mancini trusts on right now to play a defensive role for the team. We even saw him play left back when they were trying to consolidate their lead versus Spain. And it tells me that Mancini, of course, has a lot of faith in Di Lorenzo. Ironically, what actually happened is Emerson was substituted off. But that's actually a good thing, right? Because Emerson was able to secure a clean sheet before Spain actually eventually scored. And to me, even if you don't see Emerson as a very strong attacking option, it's quite interesting that we could be looking at a game that could be 0-0 potentially at roughly 17 minutes. And someone like Emerson is potentially substituted off, and we see the same sort of changes from Mancini, where he brings in Rafael Toloi in the right back position and then moves Di Lorenzo to the left. And in that kind of structure, that's where Emerson would actually funnily get a clean sheet, and that's the only reason why I've kind of selected him as the best pick. I don't think he's a very good offensive player. We saw him struggle with chances that I think Spinazzola would have done better with in the Spain game. But simply put, I think it just makes sense to have him here just for the odd potential where I think he might be the one substituted off and actually secure a clean sheet once again. Chiellini, as I mentioned, is similar to Bonucci, but his pricing kind of makes him not worthwhile. The English defenders are cheaper than Chiellini as well, and for that reason I would not really touch Chiellini here. It just makes sense to either go for one fullback and one centre-back from Italy before you kind of look at Chiellini. And the keepers, I think this is really up to your personal preference. It really comes down to how you envision this game tactically to go. I personally feel, my gosh, I totally forgot that Jordan Pickford didn't play for both teams. But in all seriousness, I mean, we know these keepers are doing exceptionally well for the teams. I would say Pickford is somewhat uncomposed in terms of how eager he is to kind of push the ball out of the box and kind of punch it out. But with the exception to that, I think there's not many kind of weaknesses in terms of Pickford's play. He tries to always go for this long ball to Kane, which actually magically somehow works all the time. And with Donnarumma's case, I think his distribution out of the back is somewhat poor. And we saw glimpses of these kind of mistakes versus Spain. But in terms of, actual goalkeeping, I think he's been class in terms of actually stopping chances. And we saw him get the extra bonus point, actually, versus Spain as well, as a result of making quite a few good saves in that game. And I think there's high potential for this game to be a low-scoring game. And for that reason, of course, I personally would like to go with more defenders. So if I show you my 5 free transfers, I've actually brought in Barella, Insigne, Bonucci, and Di Lorenzo. The reason why I've done that is because even though I can go for someone like Emerson, I personally prefer Bonucci for his potential set-piece attacking returns. And I do feel like England could actually score within the 90 minutes, which means that I don't necessarily like Emerson that much. And simply put, I think Bonucci, if I had to compare the two, I would prefer Bonucci over Emerson. But then Emerson would be my overall second best defender to pick out of the Italian team. So in terms of priority, I would just always pick Bonucci. But I think Emerson makes sense. That's the reason why I've gone for Bonucci. And as I mentioned with Di Lorenzo, he's kind of that budget option that has been able to kind of flex my team, where I'm now allowed to have Insigne on and Barella on. And what I will end up doing actually is to bring Kane on, to bring Maguire on, to bring Shaw on as well, and drop Immobile, Morata, and Pedri. So I will actually be going for a 5-4-1 formation with more defenders. And the reasoning behind this is because if I expect, let's say, one team to get a clean sheet, which I think is actually quite highly likely here, especially in a final game where players are usually a lot more tense and the kind of ambition from both teams is a bit more subdued just due to the occasion, I actually like the fact that, let's say if you have 3 defenders from both teams, which I will actually, because I will kind of balance out with my keeper here. So I have 3 English defenders, and I have 3 almost Italian defenders, and that is at least 18 points that we're kind of dealing with, right, from the defensive position, if we expect the teams to have a clean sheet. If we compare it kind of to what the midfielders and the forwards can bring to the table, if a forward scores, you're getting 4 points. If a midfielder scores, you're getting 5 points, and of course assists across the board are just 3 points for everyone, so we're not really going to consider that almost as a differential. But in my opinion here, it just makes more sense to have defenders, because the additional 4 points is almost more secure than I think than, let's say, one person scoring a goal or two persons scoring a goal, because two persons scoring a goal is roughly 8 points, whereas if you keep, let's say, a clean sheet as a team, we're talking here at least 18 points, right? So the way it's almost spread across players is, I think, a lot more beneficial for points, especially when we only have one game in hand. And for that reason, I will go for these transfers. But also keep in mind, as a last word of note and just a bit of a warning, as usual, of course, you'll be able to see the lineups before the deadline ends. And of course, we'll be providing a live stream covering any kind of shock events where we might see a change in tactics, a change in formation as well. Keep in mind, some players could still get injured before the match day, so this is a little bit of an initial team selection. But I think it just makes sense if you prioritize maybe dropping Immobile this match day. Let me know what you guys feel about that, and I wish you guys the best luck in the finals. I hope you guys are all doing well in your private leagues, and if you have any kind of questions and comments, please leave them below. Thank you very much.